Emily Dickinson's poem, There's Been a Death, in the Opposite House, explores the somber experience of death through the perspective of an observer. The poem, with its concise and vivid imagery, delves into the rituals, emotions, and social aspects surrounding death. The poem begins with a matter-of-fact statement: "There's been a death in the opposite house." The speaker, presumably a neighbor or passerby, notes the occurrence of death in a detached tone. This opening sets the stage for a detailed observation of the events following the death. The speaker describes the typical signs and rituals that follow a death. The windows are quickly opened, and the blinds are drawn, signaling the beginning of mourning. These actions are portrayed as almost routine, emphasizing the inevitability and regularity of death in life. The poem captures the response of the community to the death. Neighbors gather, and a sense of hushed reverence fills the air. The presence of the undertaker, referred to as the dark parade, marks the formal acknowledgement of death. This highlights the communal aspect of mourning and the collective response to loss. Dickinson describes the undertaker's professional demeanor, emphasizing the formality and ritualistic nature of dealing with death. His presence brings a sense of order and solemnity to the situation, underscoring the structured ways in which society handles death. The poem mentions the arrival of a mattress and a box, symbols for the coffin. These objects are described with an air of inevitability, as they are brought to the house to fulfill their final purpose. The imagery here conveys the stark reality of death and its physical manifestations. Dickinson uses the silence that follows the initial flurry of activity to convey the presence of death. The house becomes a quiet, almost sacred space, where the gravity of the situation is palpably felt. This silence contrasts with the earlier hustle and highlights the stillness that death brings. The poem touches on the preparations for the final farewell. The undertaker's duties are performed with precision and care, symbolizing society's respect for the dead. This segment reflects the rituals and traditions that provide structure and meaning in the face of loss. Although the poem is primarily an observation, there is a subtle undercurrent of personal reflection. The speaker's detached tone suggests a coping mechanism, a way to process the reality of death by focusing on its outward signs and rituals rather than the emotional impact. Dickinson subtly hints at the cyclical nature of life and death. The routine and predictability of the rituals surrounding death suggest that this is a common, recurring experience. The community's collective response reflects the shared understanding and acceptance of this cycle. The poem concludes with a return to the initial observation, leaving the reader with a lingering sense of the inevitability and universality of death. Dickinson's portrayal of death as both a personal and communal experience invites readers to reflect on their own perceptions and rituals surrounding mortality. In There's Been a Death in the Opposite House, Emily Dickinson offers a poignant and reflective examination of death's impact on both individuals and communities. Through her keen observations and concise imagery, she captures the solemnity and routine of death, inviting readers to consider their own responses to this universal experience.